The Department of Social Development is working on bringing back a 5-year-old child who has been living in a Mauritius prison since she was born. The child, whose mother was arrested for drug trafficking, will soon be reunited with a family in the Northwest Province. For more on this, I'm joined by Lumka, Oliphant, Acting Deputy Director General for Corporate Support Services at the Department of Social Development. Very good afternoon to you, Lumka. Thanks very much for your time. I mean, it has taken months to get to this point. Briefly take us through what had to happen first before this particular step.
Thank you for having us, and good afternoon to your listeners. Firstly, let's talk about what Mauritius allows in terms of children to be in prison with their mothers. They are allowed in Mozambique to have their children up until 5 years. So that's why that the child was staying with the mother up until she was 5 years. Now, the Mauritians are saying that every child, when they reach 5 years old, they must be reintegrated. Same applies here in South Africa. We can be able to accommodate children and their mothers who are incarcerated for up to 2 years. So after that, then we received a social development, a notification from DERCO coming from the other country that there is a child who is in distress in Mauritius, and the circumstances are surrounding that child. So before any social worker has to go to Mauritius, we have to then find, number one, from the mother, a nominated caregiver for the child in the country. We must also find out that that nominated caregiver is willing to look after the child. How are the circumstances in the country? What type of family is that a child going to come to in South Africa? And is it an environment where a child can be able to grow up safely and also protected? So yes, a lot happens before a child comes, and then other departments come in. Department of Home Affairs has to come in because now the child has to travel from that country to this country. Also registration of the child, because as she comes in, all those things must have been done by the different departments. Then in that country, before the child comes to South Africa, which is why it takes so long for the social workers to come back, that country must then give to South Africa legally the child and hand them over through a process of their justice system. So this is why then it takes so long for us to get here. And also when the social workers travel to Mauritius, they have to stay a few days so that the processes on the other side can also happen legally. The country is giving the child, and handing over the child to the rightful people.
Well, I mean, you've managed to repatriate about 22 children since 2015. One wonders how many of similar cases are still in the application process.
At the moment, there's no indication that there is one that is in the application process, but we can safely say most of the children that we have repatriated, the case is mostly mothers who are smuggling drugs in different countries. And this is why these stories are very important to highlight to the South Africans, especially young women. I also remember, Vuyo, we once went to Brazil to repatriate 2 children of similar cases. And we found a lot of young women from South Africa in the women's jail in Brazil. And you find that the stories of these children of these young women were from different places. We found young women from rural areas in Tunjambili. Others were recruited while they are still studying at different universities. Abanye would think that they're going to go to Brazil and come back on Monday, and only to find out they are smuggling drugs, and they get arrested and are used as decoys. So it's very important that we do speak to young women. And also, it looks like the modus operandi for these drug, cartels. It looks like they are also, targeting pregnant women, thinking that it can be smoother when a pregnant woman, passes through the different, countries.
Well, I would imagine, I mean, this season where people get, young women especially, get lured into all sorts of activities that look like they are all fun and innocent. It's important for everyone to be vigilant. But there's an aspect of this, of course, that is just as important as the process that you've just concluded with regard to this particular case, the Mauritius case, which is, the distress, especially for the child, although it cuts both ways, of having to, part with your mother. And how do you deal with that in the process of handing them over to whether it's a relative or a grandmother or anyone who's prepared to raise the child?
It's very traumatic, Vuyo. As you are talking, I still remember this particular case that we went to Brazil with, and I was actually present. The two children, they cried from Sao Paulo to South Africa on the plane because they had not seen lights, they had not been, seen, being not let alone being at an airport and being on a plane. They were just given to strangers. And actually, even the inmates that were there with the mothers, they were also crying because this was their baby as well. And it is very traumatic. This is why then the social workers will have to spend some time on the other side for the child to at least have some bit of familiarity and be able to know that they are being handed over to people that they can trust. This is why it then becomes important that we have a social worker from the Northwest, because once they land in South Africa, the DSD national social worker will have to give the DSD Northwest social worker to take and proceed with the process. So it's very painful. I even remember the one mother was a twin, an identical twin in South Africa. And, the baby thought that when she was seeing the mother's identical twin, he was seeing his own mother, and he jumped over to the mother's twin sister. And then after realizing that, no, this person does not even have a breast for me to suckle, and the child, was so confused. But, and I think in that particular case, it was also very interesting for me to watch what happens between, those families. And it can be very, very traumatic for you because they are not also used to the normal life except for the prison. It's going to be very interesting for this one because I think it is the first case where we have to at least take a child who can speak for themselves, who's 5 years old. It will be interesting for the colleagues who have traveled there to tell us, what is a child like? What does she speak? All of those things that we will be getting from that side. And hopefully you will connect with our colleagues in Mauritius who are also in communication on the other side.
Is the situation any different locally? In other words, you have children born of mothers who are in local prisons who at some point now have to be taken away from their mothers and be put in the custody of relatives.
It is the same here in the country, Vuyo. What happens as well, the same process when the child turns 2. We work with the Department of Correctional Services. Actually, today, we're trying to showcase what happens and where we've been over the past 30 years in terms of what happens to women who are incarcerated when they are pregnant and they give birth to their children. In South Africa, we let them live with their mothers until they are 2 years old. Again, the same process of social workers trying to make sure that they find the nominated parent, a willing and nominated caregiver, and all the services then that are required to be given to a child then we give them as well for you. So it is the same process, and children are then integrated into their families. And of course, maybe it might be easier when it's in the country because it's language, the same language, all of the things that we can be able to do. But sometimes it becomes very, very difficult when a child is born in another country and they speak a different language, and they have to also adapt from this side where they will be able to find a school for them. For instance, one of the things that are coming to my mind now is what language is the child speaking? Are we going to be able to find a school for the child, within where they stay? So it's a lot of processes and a lot of departments that we need to make sure come together with us in terms of making sure that this child receives the necessary care.
Just very briefly, Lumka, before I let you go, how far do you then have to stretch that best interests of the child standard? In other words, what are you obligated to do in terms of the law once a child arrives or leaves prisons? You've just mentioned several departments that have to get involved, but very briefly, what are the key things that you have to do to ensure that the child's best interests are actually taken into account?
Firstly, when they come into the country, we would have registered them with Home Affairs for the traveling of the documents. Secondly, we need to make sure that the health status of the child, the other country must give us if the child got all the immunization, up to date, all of those things. We then also have to take them to the Department of Health so that they can be able to check the health of the child generally, because now we are bringing a child who has been in a situation like a prison. We must make sure that the child is healthy. If there's anything that we need to do, we can be able to do that. And we have checked the circumstances of the grandmother whom the child is going to stay with. We have ascertained that the grandmother is not working, so it means that the social protection system and the social assistance a system must kick in terms of SASSA, social development, and also making sure that after that, the courts as well are involved, whether we must also give legally to the grandmother this child, register them, and be able to account for the child in every possible right that the child needs to have. Then after that, it will be then the integration with the family and making sure that the family, and the child are together. And I'm sure now, because this one is 5 years old, we need to know whether there was an ECD that they went to, where can we get the child into as they come in. So all the rights that South African children have, we have to make sure that we make them available even to this child and every other child who is within the borders of South Africa.
Lumka Oliphant, thank you very much for your time. So, Deputy Director General in the Department of Social Development.